Hey, I'm Kamar Mack. I'm a student ambassador from Georgetown University, and I'll be giving a talk on how to win hyperlocal elections and more using Mathematica. Today, my talk is on using Mathematica and using data storage tools to catalyze your team to better enable you to win hyperlocal elections, or more generally, just promote a message in a hyperlocal setting. So this is kind of the flow of the presentation. I'll go through 4 different kind of big picture topics. First of all, I'll talk about the goals of the strategy used in this application. So basically laying out why these strategies are helpful and when they come up. I'll talk about how to create and clean a master list of prospects that you can reach out to, that you can use as kind of your base, for lack of better words, how to find those lists, how to procure those lists, and then how to make them most useful for the purpose of delegating to a team. I'll also talk about ways to visualize your progress using Mathematica. It's a great way to motivate your team, and it's also a great way for you to keep track of how well you're doing for each segment of your prospects, because we'll talk about how to categorize your prospects. And then we'll kind of wrap up with what I hope to be kind of an open-ended conversation about alternative use cases and topics for further exploration using these strategies for hyperlocal settings. Okay, let's dive in. So basically the goals of our strategy are to use Mathematica to organically make our message go viral through word of mouth. Another goal is to optimize our outreach efforts by ensuring that we are approaching like each of our prospects in a logical order, and that each prospect is approached by a person who's most likely to persuade him or her. And that's a very important step, because there's basic human psychology that shows that people are more likely to perform a certain action or do something in your favor if they're being asked by a close friend. So we'll talk about ways to delegate amongst your team. And we also are optimizing our outreach efforts by keeping track of our progress and storing that data. Last but not least, another key important goal of our strategy and why these methods help your message go viral is because at each point of the strategy, you're encouraging the people you are communicating with to persuade other people. So it's an organically useful strategy. And the use case that I used was back at my university, where I was very involved in our student association. And so I had a core team, and I'll explain what I mean by core team, of 5 people. And so we use these strategies to basically segment up our Facebook friends. We ended up using Facebook to put together our list of prospects. But this was my use case, and this was a very hyper-local setting because there are only 6,000 students at Georgetown, but it's still a pretty sizable population. And it's difficult to keep track of if you're just using pen and paper. And so that's where tools like Mathematica are extremely helpful. So I want to start the demo by just talking about what it looks like to create and clean a master list of prospects. And so as I mentioned, this strategy takes place when you're trying to spread a message. And so each member of my core team, I encourage them to download their list of Facebook friends. And that's what we used. And we are collecting these lists, and then ultimately we're going to aggregate them. And so, for example, you can see like these, and I also name them in a pretty natural way. I just name them the person whose friends list it is. And then you can see like, I have hundreds of Facebook friends, and you can just scroll through and see, what they look like. And I also categorize them alphabetically just to make the data display easier to read. And so you do that for each member of your core team. So as I mentioned, there were 5 of us. And so Javier did it as well. As you can see, there are a few areas of overlap between my friends list and Javier's friends list. And that's going to be extremely important. And we'll come back to how to take advantage of that fact. And so also my vice presidential candidate was named Jessica, so we obviously used her list as well. We had a campaign manager named Mara, and we had a communications director named Cheryl. And so as you can see, the goal is to put together as big of a list as possible to begin with, And so you can use Facebook, you can use Twitter, you can, if it's an even more local setting, you can literally write them out. It really depends on the use case. But the important thing is that you complete this first step and get together all of the prospects that your core team covers. And then the next step, what you do is you want to combine them to make a master list of prospects. And so there's a couple different ways to do it, because what you want to do is you have to ensure that all of these prospects are in your target demographic. And so based on the use case, that could mean they're of a certain age, or they live in a certain zip code, or they fit some other characteristic. In our case, we had to make sure that everyone in our list was a student at Georgetown who was eligible to vote. And so as you're thinking about how these strategies can apply to your day-to-day life, that's an important step, because it can potentially be an arduous task, but it's extremely important. So this is kind of at the second step, as I mentioned, all you do is you aggregate these friends lists. And as you can see, there are several areas where there's overlap, right? So like, if you look at Akash or if you look at Aaron, there are duplicates, because more than one person from our core team had this person in their friends list. And so this list right here has the occurrences from all of the lists. And this final step for creating and cleaning your master list of prospects is the most important, step number 3, where you have to remove the duplicates, remove the repetitions, and sort the prospects into 5 tiers. And the reason we have 5 tiers is because, as I mentioned, I had 5 team members. And you basically count the number of times that each prospect appears in the set of 5 lists. And for the prospects who appear in all 5 lists, you put them in the top tier. And these are the people that you want to reach out to first, because as I mentioned, you want to set up a logical order to attack this list and to spread your message, and also try to recruit people to join your movement and to join the initiative. And so this as I named it, Clean Master List, because it has these divisions and it has kind of a starting point for you and your team to split up the work. Okay. As I mentioned, once you have the Clean Master List and once you have kind of a breakdown based on the tier structure, you want to use this Clean Master List to divide the outreach among your core staff and then keep track of the results by tier. So for example, as I mentioned, there were 5 of us in our group, and we just had to take a look at the 200, there were 281 prospects in our first tier. And so we split that list up among the group of us, and we decided, who would be most likely to convince a person in that top tier to join our campaign. And you can do that for the entirety of your first tier, or you can choose a segment. But the most important thing is that what you should get from these strategies is that it doesn't make sense for you to be reaching out to someone who is only friends with 2 members of your core team if you haven't gone through the people who are most engaged with your core team. And you also, as you're communicating with the people on this master list, you want to have your core team keep track of the progress. And so we divided it up among kind of 3 different possibilities. The person that we reached out to either said yes, they said no, or they said maybe, and they'll need a follow-up later on. And so this is kind of what it looked like at the very end. And so, out of the 1,400 people that were in our clean master list, we were able to keep track of, which of these people said yes, and which of these people ultimately could then go and help us attack the second tier of prospects, and then so on and so forth up to the 3rd tier. And when combined with your basic social media strategies that you're doing just kind of to the general public to boost your names, like we had a website, we had, obviously flyers, we did events. This kind of word of mouth and direct marketing strategy was a great complement, because people, they hear your message in passing if you're promoting it, but when they get that face-to-face, or when they get that direct either email, direct Facebook message, direct text message, whatever it may be, when they get that direct engagement, they're dramatically more likely to join your cause. And it's particularly if you can identify who's the best person from your core team to make that outreach, you'll boost your results dramatically. And so I also kind of want to show what it looks like to use Mathematica to display the results. And there's some interesting findings that I'll try my best to explain kind of how they came about. But as I mentioned, there were 281 people in our first tier who were friends with all 5 members. And we were able to show what the breakdown was among who said yes, who said maybe, who said no. And for the first tier, as you can imagine, there's a very high percentage of people who ultimately said yes and who ultimately voted for myself and Jessica. And then as you keep going by tier, you can see the percentage of people who say yes, it'll decrease until we get to the very end, and it'll kind of fluctuate. Also, just kind of a logistical note, there are going to be people who don't respond to your outreach at all and who just don't really want to hear what you're saying. And so everyone in the clean master list, they automatically get an indication of no. And if they don't respond, they kind of keep that indication. So that's an important bookkeeping strategy as well. If someone is not receptive, then you want to keep an account of that appropriately. So I'll keep moving right along. So for the third tier, there were a resounding number of no's, a few yeses, but the size of these tiers are also getting smaller, which you can notice, because that's part of why the talk is framed as like hyperlocal settings, because in a university, there aren't going to be that many people who I'm friends with that 4 of my close friends aren't. So that's the explanation as to why the size of the tiers decreases for the 4th and the 5th tier. But as you can also imagine, there are a few people who are, for lack of better words, randomly friends with a given person. So they may have been a member of their freshman floor, or they may have met in a class. And that person was, as we found in like the 4th tier, there were a lot of people who were actually pretty open to the idea, even though they didn't know much about myself or know much about a member of our team. So it really just fluctuates, but the general strategy is that you want to take a logical and strategic approach to how you reach out to people. So I'm going to now transition to the part of my talk where I kind of explore what the strategies would look like for alternative use cases, and what the strategies can also, how they can be expanded upon in the future. So as I mentioned, we were in a student government election, but these strategies can also be extremely, these strategies could also be extremely helpful for like a small municipal election. If someone is running for county clerk or running for a judge position, whatever it may be, that person, especially because they have a much bigger budget than we had, they can put together a list of their close friends, and they can put together a kind of more robust spreadsheet and have people kind of organized by their neighborhood, organized by their cul-de-sac, organized by their neighborhood association membership, whatever it may be, and conduct this kind of word-of-mouth viral marketing in the same way. There's also a kind of a little bit more about myself. I'm very interested in entrepreneurship, and something that founders always encounter is a lack of exposure with their minimum viable product. But by using these strategies, you can kind of segment your prospects and reach out to members who are members of your community that will be willing to try your product. And then while they're at it, you can tell them, a specific group of acquaintances that they know as well, who they can refer the product to as well. Last but not least, it could also be extremely helpful for spreading a petition, and that kind of process is becoming much easier through the use of internet than it was in the past. Something else I want to touch on, other topics for exploration that I think could add to the richness and the impact of these strategies, would be kind of weighting each team member differently when you're segmenting the members into tiers. So for example, I was the presidential candidate for my campaign. Jessica, as I mentioned, was the vice presidential candidate. It would have been kind of fascinating to see if we could have kind of preferred members of our prospect list who are friends with myself and Jessica, weighing that heavier than if they were friends with Cheryl, Javier, or Mara. And I think there could be some interesting kind of data analysis to show kind of the adoption rate, or the rate at which a member says yes to vote for us, given their being friends with myself or Jessica. So I think that would be another interesting kind of topic to explore. Last but not least, I think it would also be interesting to see what this would look like to do the data storage using Wolfram Cloud. So for example, with us, we communicated directly with the people we reached out to, and then kind of stored the results via Excel, and then just kind of uploaded them to Mathematica at the end. But I think it could be interesting, for when you all use these strategies for your own use cases, you could set up kind of a Wolfram Cloud portal and allow your core team members and the other people you get to join your movement to log the results that way. Yeah, I think, and also I guess that's kind of all I have. If there are other use cases that you all have questions about, or if you have questions about kind of the strategies that we took for our campaign, now is the time to talk about that.